I'm going to pass it over and we'll get started.
Hi, thank you so much. First, I'd like to start out by thanking GBTA for creating this amazing sustainability pavilion. This is the first ever. For also forming the Sustainability Leadership Council and bringing together all of these thought leaders to help drive the industry towards a more sustainable future. And for establishing the GBTA Foundation, which is a 501c organization dedicated to sustainability. It's been reconvened this year, and we're excited to see what happens next. We also want to thank GBTA for having their first Earth Day white paper and proving what we've already known, and that's that 89% of the business travel industry says that sustainability is a high priority for their company. Sustainability really encompasses everything from waste to water, from biodiversity to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But for purposes of today's panel, we're going to focus on what is our highest impact. And with respect to aviation, that really means greenhouse gas emissions and how we can drive towards net zero. We all know that aviation powers progress, but it also creates carbon. And that's what we need to address first and foremost. So with that, I'd like to go through some of our panelists here today and talk about their sustainability strategies. Perhaps we can start with Amelia from Delta and tell us a bit about your $1 billion carbon investment.
Great. Thanks, Nora. And I just want to echo her thanks. We are all so pleased to be here. Not only thanks to GBTA, but these women up here, if you don't know them, this is a powerhouse. And I am so honored to be on this panel. Yeah. The theme today, we're going to talk about our individual airlines, but the theme today is that we are united. And I mean, not United Airlines. Sorry, Lauren. But I mean, you'll hear Delta talk about we've got 80,000 employees that are focused on sustainability, but it goes beyond that. It goes across the industry. It goes beyond the industry. It goes to each one of you. And so we just want to thank you for your partnership as well. We're all learning as we go. We're going to figure this out together. It's going to take us a while, so let's all stick together as we go. So when you think about the journey for the airline industry, and I'll come to the $1 billion, we are a hard to decarbonize sector. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's going to take a while. We are also the lowest margin of the hard to decarbonize sector, meaning we don't make a lot of money, so we need some help because it's going to cost a little bit of money to decarbonize. And so for Delta, that's what led us to the $1 billion commitment. We want to put our money behind it so that many of you and many in our supply chain can also feel confident that, yes, we're all in this and we're going to put money behind transitioning. And that's what's going to take us to net zero at 2050. That's what's going to take us to our science-based targets at 2035. But on the other hand, we know that travelers, many of your travelers, the average consumer, they need to feel confident in our industry, and they don't understand net zero, and they don't understand science-based targets. And so what they see every single day is really what matters. And so our industry is straddling this huge problem of how do we decarbonize our jet fuel supply while simultaneously making sure that the average consumer sees in front of them we are trying to get rid of single-use plastic. We are trying to amplify diverse brands that are lifting up communities that need support. We are electrifying our ground support equipment. And so the $1 billion goes towards things that the average consumer doesn't understand, but simultaneously we're trying to double down on our efforts in the next decade. And so on the Delta perspective, we've removed 4.9 million pounds of single-use plastic in the first quarter of this year. 25% of our ground support equipment will be electric by the end of this year, moving to 50% by 2025. And again, every time we turn over a product on board, we're doing it from a lens of not only environmental sustainability, but social sustainability. And that's what our consumers see, and we want that trust to continue through the decade.
Thank you, Amelia. So we've heard about science-based targets by 2035 and net zero targets by 2050. But Diana from Alaska, maybe you could tell us a bit more about your pledge for net zero by 2040.
Sure, happy to. And I'll just echo the thanks for having us. When you're in the expo later, make sure you tell everybody that the cool place to be is in the green section, because there's a lot of phenomenal talks going on over the next couple of days. So Alaska, it's funny, to what Amelia said, we're all working on a lot of the same things. The words might be slightly different, the dates might be slightly different, the numbers might be slightly different, but it really is a shared goal. And so when we were talking with our board early last year about goal setting, we wanted to set a really bold target. And so we ended up setting a goal of net zero by 2040. But the board appropriately said, okay, we need to hold ourselves accountable to something really audacious to push ourselves. But first of all, how the heck are you going to get there? tell me something more than I don't know. And second, what are you going to do in the meantime to make sure that you're on pace? So where we landed was setting a 5-part path to get to net zero, and the parts of the strategy that we all use, they may make sense in each of our own sort of ecosystems. They're very similar. For us, it's a foundation of operational efficiency, things like similar GSE targets, renewing our fleet to be as fuel efficient as possible, and you heard Robert Isom from American talk a little bit about that at lunch. The third part is sustainable aviation fuels. The fourth is electrified or hybrid electric propulsion, and we believe that'll play a role first in the regional space, but not for a little while to come. And then the fifth part of the path is carbon offsets, and we've got some criteria around those, only as needed to close the gap. Our preference would be to actually fundamentally decarbonize aviation, but it's unclear how fast that technology will evolve, and the biggest leap forward is going to be in sustainable fuels, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Okay, so then we've got the big long-term path. But it's pretty easy to say, I might not be at Alaska in 18 years. Who else is going to be at Alaska in 18 years? And how is somebody going to fix this over the next 18 years? So we also set 2025 targets. And those are specifically tied around carbon, waste, and water to near-term action to make sure that we're becoming more efficient, that we are replacing single-use plastics. And the idea there is to, one, hold ourselves accountable. And actually, we put a carbon intensity target into our all-employee performance-based pay program so that literally sustainability is every single person's job, and everyone is encouraged to think about, well, what can I do to move the needle a little bit? And then also the role of waste and water is so that we can engage people in a conversation. Because as Amelia said, a lot of people don't think about, it's hard to sort of fathom exactly what it looks like to decarbonize, exactly what it looks like to fight climate change in the atmosphere. But it is very clear to think about materials that are in front of you. And so both that's a way of improving and moving in the right direction. It's also a way of engaging in a conversation and bringing people into thinking about their choices. The last thing I'll just say is, I don't know if everyone realized that we had a plant-based lunch, which I thought was really good. But Kelsey said, hey, did people seem to know there was a plant-based lunch? And I said, well, I did. You said it everywhere. But we all have sort of selective reading and hearing. And I think part of the coolest thing about having a plant-based lunch is it just makes you think about the fact that you can do that. And you can make different choices that move the needle in the right direction. So I'm excited that you all are here and in this conversation.
Great, thank you. So you've talked about electric or hydrogen propulsion aircraft on sort of regional routes, right? And we're really excited about the promise of that for short-haul travel. But we all know that for medium to long-haul travel, which constitutes approximately 80% of carbon emissions, that's what we really need to solve for. So in addition to all of the things that you just said, high integrity, high quality carbon offsets, the real reduction mechanism is through sustainable aviation fuel. So focusing on sustainable aviation fuel, there are so many different pathways as to how to get there. There are 9 different, technical pathways that are approved by ASTM. There are, a diversity of feedstocks that are available, and when you put those all in different combinations, you have over 100 different options as to how to create sustainable aviation fuel. So every single one of the ladies sitting up here on this panel has a different strategy. So if you could tell us, maybe starting with Lauren from United, how EcoSkies has built their program and how you've reached your 70% of publicly announced offtake agreements and your SAF strategy.
Yeah, so it's great to be here, first of all. It's really nice to see everyone in person. It's been a very long time. I'd also like to say thanks to GBTA and, frankly, the travel community at large for recognizing that sustainability discussions need to happen in venues like this. Sustainability is not sort of an isolated project or an issue that's solved in the corner. It's actually part of corporate strategy today. And so having this discussion with your sustainability counterparts, with your leadership, so that you can empower change, it's really crucial. So kudos to everybody here for demanding this kind of conversation in this setting. I would also like, before I answer your question, to also give a shout out to this panel, because truly what I am most proud of in the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic is the collaboration that we're seeing right now across the airlines trying to solve this problem. We each have our own strategy. We each have our own tactical implementation and how we're going to achieve our goals. But we have calls every single day, not just those of us up here, but across the entire industry about how can we go faster? What does the North Star look like? How do we collaborate, not just on the technology, but the policy and the customer engagement in ways that are meaningful so that we can show that we're committed to change and we're going to make progress in a way that actually helps permanently decarbonize aviation. So shout out to my peers here because they're amazing. So that being said, we are coming out of a pandemic and returning to travel. And so at United, we took a moment a couple of years ago and we're like, oh gosh, we don't have any cash. In fact, we owe a lot of cash to the government. We are just getting kicked off in this initiative around sustainability and supporting, frankly, a market that just doesn't exist for sustainable aviation fuel. We don't want to lose that momentum, but we can't afford to invest in it directly ourselves. And so from that discussion was born this concept of the Eco Skies Alliance, and I'm sure several folks in the room are familiar, but it was essentially a partnership with those of you in the room, the travel managers, to really identify ways that we can co-invest together to fund the green premium associated with sustainable aviation fuel. We had 2 rounds of it last year, and some of my colleagues are here, so a big shout out to my sales colleagues that have really helped us harden this concept in a way that's meaningful to every one of you. And just last year alone, United, through this program, was able to increase our sustainable aviation fuel supply by 5-fold from the year before, which is a huge demand signal to the market that it's time to change the way we fly. And we couldn't have done it without you. I heard this morning on a panel, one of the travel managers said that they're not interested in getting their PhD in sustainability. And I so appreciated that comment because you don't need to. That's why we're here to create these products and services that simplify the relationship between how you travel and do it sustainably. So on behalf of United, on behalf of Aviation, thank you for your partnership in getting to this place where we are. And I look very forward to understanding where we can go in the next year or two together.
Well, I don't think we all need our PhD in sustainability, but I think it really is exciting for everyone to understand that there are so many different options as to how to create sustainable aviation fuel. And because we're in the United States under the Biden administration SAF Grand Challenge, the goal is 3 billion gallons by 2030 and then 35 billion gallons by 2050. So what will get us there won't necessarily get us all the way to 2050. So the first, 3 billion gallons we need to focus on biofuels. So, and then to get to 35 billion gallons, we need to focus on synthetic fuels. So, Stacey, maybe you could tell us a little about what Southwest is doing with their biofuels and other sustainable SAF initiatives.
Sure, thank you. And I'll echo my counterparts here. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but thank you to you all. The partnership between travel providers and travel buyers and the symbiotic relationship that we have to have is really driving the conversation. I think the goals that you've all set for your own organizations are really informing our goals, our strategies. You guys have used your very strong and powerful voices to advocate for the work that has to be done. And so keeping this dialogue going, using forums like these, and continuing to beat the drum for sustainability in this space is going to be critical to our opportunities and our path forward. I will also echo the super cool fact that we all know each other. We work together. I have to say, and I've said this before, I don't know my counterparts in my role. My other hat that I wear at Southwest is leading supply chain management. I don't work with my counterparts in other airlines on supply chain management topics, but we work together. While we're a hyper-competitive industry, this is a space that we know collaboration is really going to be the key to breaking through some of these really difficult challenges, these barriers to achieving our objectives. And by the way, it just makes it more fun and more interesting to be able to do that with a really impressive group of collaborators and colleagues across the industry. So I'm very grateful to be a part of this incredible group. So at Southwest, we have set a goal, obviously, of 2050 carbon neutral in alignment with a lot of the industry. But we also knew that it was really important to take a nearer term perspective. Like Diana, you said, we want to make sure that we're doing actionable things and pulling the levers that are available today, while we're also focusing on the longer term objectives and standing up markets that don't exist or don't exist at the scale that we'll require over the longer term. and also participating in things like R&D and new jet propulsion and airframe manufacturing, things like that. It's going to take every lever. And in the vein of every lever, we also know that we're going to have to be inclusive of all of the various types of SAF in the near term. We are going to be dependent on bio-based SAFs. We know that there's going to need to be a progression towards synthetic sustainable aviation fuel, and we're continuing to work and focus there. But in the near term, we want to make sure that we are using the entirety of the scope of acceptable types of feedstocks and pathways to help us achieve our sustainability objectives. And one of the really exciting things that Southwest has done, and it makes me particularly proud of the work that our collective teams have done, and the relationship and the trust that we've built with our own internal executive team and our board, is that we had approval and have announced our investment in, sorry, there's a fly up here, it's like I'm making a beeline for my eyeballs. Our investment in Sapphire Renewables. So Sapphire Renewables is a startup SAF company that will produce sustainable aviation fuel from renewable ethanol that is produced from corn stover. So it's basically the fibrous material that's left after a corn harvest, not competing with food use. There is no really good commercial use for stover today. And we'll take that stover, be able to break it down, convert it to renewable ethanol, and then upgrade that to sustainable aviation fuel. So as our bridge to future synthetic fuels, and as our bridge away from things like offsetting that we all know, offsetting will be a bridge, offsetting is part of our plan for the near term, but we want to make sure that we're focused on more sustainable, longer term solutions that help to decarbonize.
Great. So with respect to the SAF that is presently available today, which would be biofuels, Diana from Alaska, perhaps you could tell us a bit more about the next generation of SAF, which would be synthetic fuels, and your newly announced partnership with 12.
Sure. I'll say a couple things just to start. I think there's a few things that are really mind-blowingly complicated about sustainable aviation fuels. One of them is, and I'm not a fuel expert by any stretch, and I know the folks from Shell are here, we were talking about this morning. At least traditional fuel, it's got some differences, but it's more like the difference between Honeycrisp and Pink Lady apples. Like, they're all apples. The difference between different types of SAF, it's like guavas and pineapples and apples and oranges. It's a whole fruit basket of different feedstocks, production pathways, technologies, and we need all of them. And so it's just so much more complicated to track what exactly is the fuel. So that makes your jobs harder, especially when you're not spending your whole time on it like we or our teams are. The other thing is we're all operating companies. We think about what was our on-time performance today and what's our on-time performance tomorrow and the next day. And when we talk about SAF, we're thinking 3 to 5 to 7 years down the road, because it takes 3 to 5 plus years for a new production plant to start up and bring product to market. So we all want it to be here today, but it's not in enough volumes. It is in enough volumes that all of us are using a little bit, but we need to make that grow. So then the question is, well, where do you start then? So working with our supply chain leader at Alaska Airlines, we're building a kind of balanced portfolio of different types of technologies. It definitely includes bio-based fuels, and we have to, or else we're never going to reach our target. We all have some sort of parameters around that. Certainly not wanting to get in the way of the food supply or contribute to deforestation. But those are parameters. There's a big space in the middle where we all need to be furthering different feedstocks and products. So then looking ahead, there is synthetic fuels, a couple of different varieties, but in particular using recaptured carbon dioxide, running it through technology that basically mixes it with water and renewable energy and turns it into sustainable fuel, sort of a hydrocarbon chain that has the attributes that we need for jet fuel. That technology is nascent, but it does exist, and it can produce SAF at scale over the long term if we are able to capture CO2 affordably, if we have broad access to renewable energy, and we all have water. So we should be able to solve this problem, and it's really exciting to think about how you could use something as abundant as CO2 in the atmosphere, which we actually want to reduce, and turn that into a fuel. And the technology that we're working with, this company called 12 out of the Bay Area, it's really exciting. They've got these little, what are they called? Little accelerators that actually, will run the electricity through and have the chemical reaction happen. But they need to make that at a much greater scale and then have access to blending facilities and transportation. So there's a lot of problem solving to be had, but we're excited about where the future can take us.
Nora, can I add one thing? Because I think Diana laid that out really well where the challenges are, but I think for many of you, the biggest challenge is transparency. I think that's what we hear from a lot of you saying, I want SAF, but I don't quite understand how it works. And how do I know what the greenhouse gas emissions reductions are? And how do I know I can claim those emissions reductions? And so I'm not going to tell you we have all the answers. We don't. You've heard us say we're very aligned. We're not going to undercut each other. We are pushing for industry solutions as much as you are asking for them. But you got to bear with us because this is taking us some time. We're building a new product, but we're also trying to build the accounting and the registry behind it. And so sometimes these legal contracts, when you're purchasing SAF from us, it's going to take a little bit longer because we're learning, our legal teams are learning. Not to mention we're trying to build out custom solutions at the airline level. For our instance, Delta's got new sustainability on demand reporting, but even that is iterative, right? We're learning from you. It's, Delta's is listen, act, listen. That's what this whole environment is for sustainability. We're listening to you, we're trying to bring you solutions, and then we're listening again. Just know that we're aligned in that approach. And then not to mention, I'm looking at you, Nora, and of course the Shell team, we're trying to look at what technology needs to sit on top of there. And I will tell you 6 months ago, I couldn't have told you what blockchain is. And I really still can't. I still use it's like candies, connecting candies. I'm very kindergarten level with blockchain. But my point being, we're all not only learning about environmental sustainability, then you layer on these other concepts on top of it. So anyways, the takeaway being, we got your back. We are listening to you. We're going to solve it for you. It's just going to take us a little bit of time.
Absolutely. And I hope the audience understands that the key here really is collaboration, and every single person is saying the same thing. Unequivocally, sustainable aviation fuel is the primary lever for the decarbonization of aviation, and that's why we're all working so hard on this. Every single person up here has been advocating and lobbying for the passage of the blender's tax credit, and it happened. So this is a big, big deal. The Inflation Reduction Act contains $369 billion in energy security and climate finance, and there's a blender's tax credit as a component of that. So we're thrilled with that. Just to wrap up, quick roundtable, if you could give one piece of very concrete advice to the members of the audience as to the actions that they could take before year-end 2022 in furtherance of their net zero targets, what would that be? Stacey, I'll start with you.
Sure. I'll put a personal and a professional spin on that. I think on a professional level, be a voice of advocacy within your own companies. Again, like Amelia said, we're learning so much. The amount I've learned over the last year is it continues to shock me how far we've come. So be voices of advocacy within your own companies. Make sure that you have a sound and achievable sustainability roadmap for your own corporations. Make sure it's actionable, and make sure that there's an expectation for accountability around that. It becomes a tool for rallying your employees around you, your colleagues, and then the participants within your business, whether that's suppliers or customers, to the cause. And then on a personal level, I love what GBTA did here around making your own green commitments. Carry these things into your own lives. My kids and my husband are all annoyed. I make sure that we all carry our water bottles everywhere, so we're not having to purchase single-use plastics. I've been a vegetarian forever. We're moving to more and more plant-based at home. There are things that we can do in our own lives, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think that's a mode of thinking that sets us all up for failure. Make it a small change incrementally, and if you don't win one day, you've got tomorrow to try again.
So interesting question. What I love about the dialogue on sustainability today is that core to all of the discussions we're having is innovation. I mean, we are looking at new technologies. We are looking at new policies. We are looking at new collaborations. We are looking at new product for travel, for all of you, to enable you to have that discussion within your organization so that you can feel empowered to both not just partner with us, but then accelerate the pace of commitment for sustainable travel. I think that really creates an opportunity for you to think a little bit differently about what are you hearing from your travelers within your organization, how does that align with your company's climate commitments, and come talk to us. I mean, that's exactly what we're here for. I think Diana alluded to it, we are really in a bit of a foundation building phase right now. Anything from, what is the greenhouse gas accounting and how does that manifest in a book and claim? I don't expect any of you to understand that, but it's really important so that when you invest in that SAF, that you can claim those credits against your Scope 3 emissions. That's crucial. And so we're all thinking through how can we actually afford you interesting, innovative products and services so that you feel empowered to have that discussion internally. So come talk to us because we all want to make sure that we're simplifying, but also doing it in a meaningful capacity.
Great, I'll keep going. You've heard us talk a little bit about coalition and collaboration. Please plug into this space. I think many of you probably already have. GBTA is a great way to do it. We are not going to solve this alone. We need all of you with us. Lauren and I both are part of what's called the First Movers Coalition, which is focused through John Kerry's office on decarbonizing aviation. Corporations are welcome. Please join us. What we're trying to do is get to that next generation SAF by the end of this decade. That's just one example. The LEAF Coalition is here, by the way, and they are really changing the offset space through private public sector financing. No one is doing this alone. There are thousands of coalitions. If anything, my calendar is fully booked for the next 6 years, essentially, with all these partnerships we've joined. But the point being, if you are not connected into this in at least a couple different ways, you probably need to join some new coalitions because we need your voices. And then my personal advice, many of you have heard me speak about this before, find out how you connect to this. And this looks different for every person, but you cannot be a voice for change unless you have a very deep passion for this space, and that it looks different for everyone. And it took me a while to get there, and I tell many people, it wasn't until I moved in this space that I really learned about the criticality of this. And then I looked when I got home at my 4 and 7-year-old kids and thought, I'm not solving this for this industry that I love. I'm really solving it for my children. And so I just encourage you to find that thing that connects you. Maybe it's animals, maybe it's you've experienced some sort of climate catastrophe where you live, whatever it may be, find that connection because this is really hard work. And if you're not personally invested, it's very easy to kind of say, well, I'm going to go think about something else.
That's great advice. All right, so I have 3 things, and some of them are similar. One is make friends with your sustainability partner at your company. And let's talk together because we don't have it all figured out. You don't have it all figured out. But the dialogue can make us all better. The second thing is then, if we have a chance to share, here's what I'm working on and here's what you're working on, let's pick one thing in that space and go take some action on it, because those actions will all add up to something bigger. The third thing, and it kind of relates to the coalitions, we really need help from the government. And I've been through this up and down, yay, we got the BTC. Oh my God, it's really short. That's okay, it's a good step, right? Like this sort of emotional curve but it's a really phenomenal step, and we are going to need to keep doing more because it's not going to solve the problem alone. And we need private sector capital to invest in this space. Some of us are trying to do that with seed funding. Alaska's got a little venture arm, but we don't have, to Amelia's point about the economics of aviation, we don't have the power of some of the big private capital investment firms. So go with us with a shared voice that's not just aviation to say that this stuff is important and galvanize people around it.
Thank you so much.
And just drop.
No, but just to conclude, what the U.S. government has finally passed is historic, it's transformative. The government has finally set the policy framework, and now this is the call to action to everyone in this room. Like, the private sector needs to step up, needs to take action. So that is your call to action.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nora.